Folks, it's Joe and
Shannon Clark.
hey, Shannon Clark and Elliot is here today. Good morning, good afternoon, evening. This is really rewarding. I see a lot of familiar names on the list of folks here today, so we're getting to be a little family. I like that. If you would kindly write good morning or something and say, I can hear you okay, I can see you okay, and let me know where you are calling in from. My friend Ronnie is calling in from Israel, and Jeff Carlisle is calling in from the East Coast, and Khalid is calling in from Minneapolis, and Mark and Myron are around the corner, but I cannot see them because I'm not allowed to leave the house. And Michelle's here, and Patrice is here. So nice to see you all. Colorado, Philly, Chicago, 2 Chicagos, Boston, London, Montreal. Nice. I like that. So today we're going to talk about emergency use authorization. If anyone did not get the video from last week or the week before, let me know. Leave me a little note here. Actually, I'm going to leave a chat message here. And that is for everyone. That is the link to where you can subscribe to the channel where I post all of the videos after we have them, so that way you don't ever have to say, Joe, are we getting the slides in the video? That's where they're going to be. Ooh, South Africa. What time is it there? We'll find out in a moment. 17:15, 5:15. Let's see what your mug says. Is it branded? Is it your branded mug? What's it say?
No, the Hamptons at Cupertino. Is that a thing?
I don't know. It should say user-wise on it. See, I got my medical devices mug. Branded merch, folks.
I guess we have personal mugs and they're kept at work.
Oh, well, see, this is work for me. And this is my workmate. He's my chief marketing officer.
Nice. Well, he's very effective.
Hi, Joy. And I think Paula's on too. Before we start, so frequent subscribers to this channel know that my friend Michelle Wolf and I talk regulatory stuff all the time, and she's working on a template for any/all mask manufacturers around the world who want to submit for emergency authorization using the protocol for their masks. And I said, how many companies could that possibly be? She said, thousands. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. How could there be thousands of companies making masks? Sounds like 10 companies should be making masks, but there it is. So there's a whole section on masks, I know. I know you have a presentation. Before we start, is there a whole emergency use section on ventilators, which is the other big topic? I imagine there is, but I haven't heard anyone talking about it. So maybe before I give you like the screen, do you know the answer to that? And folks, you're welcome to ask questions from the start.
Well, ventilators is certainly the hot topic this week. It started out, everyone was desperate for masks. We saw a lot of EUAs coming in with masks. We're involved with a couple of EUAs for masks, and we also have a template, so we'd be happy to share. But one of the most interesting projects with masks is 95 Decon, where we're trying to empower hospitals to reuse masks instead of having to acquire new ones. But as of about 2 weeks ago, there was a huge insurgence of ventilators getting submitted, and so we were able to push through one of the first EUA ventilators. And companies like Tesla and also some startups are kind of throwing their hats in the ring, pushing their products through EUA. So we're going to see many EUAs coming through with ventilators in the next 2 weeks.
I don't remember who it was, but so I'll put this link in the chat as well. For those of you who haven't joined and want to, there's a free chat room so that we can keep talking during the week. And somebody, I'm not going to look now, it'll be too distracting, in the Ventilators channel mentioned that somebody with a biggish name submitted a ventilator and it was rejected. So I'll look at that while you're talking in a bit. And yes, Corey, I'm sure Michelle can get you that template. In fact, you're both on that chat room, so you can ask one another directly. How about I give you the screen and you entertain us with your knowledge? Does that sound?
Excellent. I'd be happy to.
Okay. You are a fellow organizer, so I think you can just commandeer the screen. Is that right?
I would imagine so. Just trying to find the controls here. Apologies for the delay. Oh, interesting.
Here, make presenter. I'll give you a little extra boost there. Yay!
So the next trick is to move it.
No. Wait, no. First, tell us about this photograph, which is obviously your wedding day.
Yeah, the happiest day of my life so far. I got married in August, and it was absolutely
just
magical.
August. This past August.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it was just the best.
Yeah.
We had a dance off. It's a tradition among all my friends. This is our 8th dance off, boys versus girls, and the girls won. Though it was a little bit rigged.
Was it were you in a sorority?
No.
Oh, that sounds sorority versus fraternity-ish to me.
It's actually, so all of my friends come, so I originally came from Abbott Laboratories, and all of my friends are from Abbott Laboratories too, because we were in the professional development program. So we've been a tight-knit group since 2010. We were basically shipped around the country, living in housing together, working at different Abbott sites. So we became very close. So that's kind of my sorority.
Okay. Well, for those of you who want a special session on dance off, Shannon will be available later today.
Excellent. All right, well, I will present this on the screen. I won't be able to look at the screen this way, but let's see.
You can make that full size, yeah.
Are you able to see this?
Okay, yep, yes. I'm going to put myself on mute so I can type to some people their answers and have at it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Do interrupt me at any point with questions. I'm happy to answer questions along the way. We've been doing weekly webinars at UserWise about emergency use authorization. And this one will be kind of touching upon who am I, what is an EUA, what are the steps for obtaining an EUA, and then how do you expedite your EUA. So what are the tips and tricks of the trade for getting your EUA both approved and expediently approved. Quick slides about us. I founded UserWise 6 years ago to co-create safe and usable medical products. Before founding UserWise, I worked at Intuitive Surgical, doing a bunch of usability work for the Da Vinci Xi surgical robot and Da Vinci SP surgical robot. We do a lot of complex medical equipment as well as more simple home use products. Okay, just had a pop up. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm a certified professional industrial engineer. I've been doing human factors, quality engineering, and R&D engineering for the past decade. I also contribute to the World Standards Committees in human factors, so I'm very passionate about human error reduction. Denise Forkey isn't joining us today, but she's my colleague that typically is on the webinar, and she comes from a clinical engineering background. I think a lot of human factors engineers like us, we come from a wide variety of backgrounds. Lana, for example, has an MBA and came from a packaging engineering background. But most of us at UserWise are engineers, and so we're a very engineering-focused human factors organization. We're located in San Jose, California. And without further ado, I'll get started talking about EUAs. So typically, my staff, we focus on regulatory matters related to human factors. But since this pandemic began, we saw an opportunity to help companies navigate emergency use authorizations, because a lot of our clients, especially ventilator clients or mask clients developing novel masks, they really wanted to secure emergency use authorization. So about a month ago, we started helping these companies quickly get emergency use authorizations. So the purpose of this presentation is to sort of share our background about emergency use authorizations. And before I explain what an EUA is, I just want to give the high in the sky perspective of what is the normal regulatory process. Well, if you have a new drug, you would need to submit a 505 and perhaps a new drug application or abbreviated new drug application. All of these processes can take up to 10 years or more with all the clinical testing that needs to be done. And with EUAs, we're talking about getting authorization to sell your product in a matter of a week. So it's a little bit different. So the typical approval pathway is basic research, preclinical testing, an FDA review, and many back and forths, clinical trials, so phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and FDA review and approval. So it's a very long and treacherous path to getting approval. The 510K is not as treacherous. It's like a streamlined approach. Basically, you prove that your product is equivalent enough to a product on the market. Here we have the hominis surgical robot, which user-wise advised on the regulatory human factors aspects of, and we got 510K clearance a year or two ago. So basically, we proved that this robot was substantially equivalent to the Da Vinci Xi surgical robot, and all of development probably took 5 to 7 years. Here's another example of a product we're developing. It's a neuromodulation device, and this requires a full pre-market approval and full clinical testing, which is going to take, the clinical testing itself will take at least 2 years. So I'm just going to skip over these. So I think you get the idea that typically when you're entering into the regulatory process, it takes a long time. There's a lot of testing, a lot of evidence needs to be supplied. So I just wanted to set the stage for understanding how reduced the EUA is. Any questions so far? Oh yeah, question?
My first question was, where did I put that as I moved everything around? Would you announce to the kind folks at home what your email address is?
Sure, it's shannon.clark@userwiseconsulting.com.
And yes, Dave, we will share the slides after the call. And we have questions about ventilators and masks, but go ahead.
All right, well, maybe the questions will get answered a little bit as I continue, but I'm also happy to answer them. So what is an emergency use authorization? They will authorize certain medical products under these codes of the regulation. And this is under this umbrella called the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Reauthorization Act of 2013, PAPRA. So the emergency use authorization gives authorities to sustain and strengthen preparedness for public health, military, and domestic emergencies involving chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear agents, including emerging infectious disease threats. So the emergency use authorization, they didn't come up with it a couple weeks ago. It's been around for a while. And the intent is to produce medical countermeasures, so sort of biological defenses against whatever threat we might be facing. So the goal is to help the FDA's authority to support emergency preparedness and response and foster the development and availability of medical products for emergencies. So basically, we want to empower the FDA to empower you to bring effective medical countermeasures to market to help the public. It's a much more collaborative process than what you would typically see, and I'll speak more to that in a second. So I won't go over the full history, and you can read up on this on your own, But the EUA has been around for some time and began with 2004, where they implemented the Project BioShield Act. In the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, they wanted to facilitate stockpiling and distribution of MCMs, which are medical countermeasures, in the event of a bioterrorist attack. So our federal government is actively stockpiling medical products to deploy in the case of an emergency. And so the emergency use authorization in part is to feed that stockpile as the government hoards ventilators. They're actively hoarding ventilators right now. They hoard masks, all kinds of different products. So what products are eligible for emergency use authorization? The FDA can authorize the introduction of a medical product into interstate commerce when the product is intended for use during an actual or potential emergency. So the answer is any medical product, as long as you can argue that it is effective in addressing this emergency that we're in right now. It's not limited to just masks, it's not limited to just ventilators. Really anything that can help is eligible for emergency use authorization, though it does have to fall under one of these categories. So medical products or medical countermeasures, if you want to, join industry lingo and use cool acronyms that no one understands, definitely use MCM, because that's sort of the buzzword, especially if you're talking to the government. They love saying the word MCM. So the product categories include drugs, biologic products, and devices. So toilet paper would not be applicable. I don't know, maybe someone can challenge that. And candidate products include unapproved products, so a ventilator that has never been cleared to use, or an approved product intended for unapproved uses. So chloroquine was a really great example of a drug where they said, I think this might be effective for treating COVID-19. So then they got an emergency use authorization. They were already an approved product that had gotten through all of the clinical testing, the full gamut of requirements to get through the FDA, and then they got approved for authorized for an unapproved use. Any questions at this point?
I do. So
Oh, yeah.
EUA has a pharmacological implication as well?
What was that?
Does EUA have a pharmacological implication as well? So for example, we keep hearing about, I won't pronounce it properly, that malaria drug that potentially could be used.
Yeah.
Is that an EUA fast-tracky kind of thing?
Absolutely, yeah. So that is a great example of a product that was previously approved by the FDA, and it was fast-tracked, with a matter of weeks. It was approved for this new indication with very little clinical data. They thought, they basically said, this may be effective, and then they got an emergency use authorization.
And so it is a permitted indication for use during the EUA period?
It is, and that's a really great point. Only during the EUA period, that is the emergency period, which I'll speak to in just a moment.
I was just having this conversation yesterday. Based on previous EUAs, do you have any kind of sense of how much notice you get when the EUA period's almost up? Because I wouldn't want to stockpile masks under EUA and then find I can't sell them anymore because they just shut the door. Do I get a month?
Well, that's the scariest part of all of this. As soon as the emergency ends, you're no longer authorized to continue promoting your product. Now, they'll give you time for product disposition, but it's unclear to me whether you have to disposition the product within a certain time frame, whether you can say you've placed a bunch of orders or someone has placed a bunch of orders. Are you allowed to at least?
I have 100,000 units. It's going to take me a year.
Yeah, so that is certainly a major concern, and my ventilator clients are certainly very fearful of that moment when the emergency declaration is withdrawn, because as soon as that happens, the emergency use authorization is no longer valid. And they do claim that they will give you time for disposition, but it all, from a financial and business sense, it is unclear what that impact will be. So it is a very scary thing.
I would think that as soon as my EUA is, would it be approved or cleared? I don't know, but
I've been using the term authorized because
okay.
510Ks are clears, PMAs are approved, and EUAs are just authorized. Just,
Okay.
you know, we didn't really
I
look
would
at
think
it, we authorize you to proceed.
if I want to go into the mask business long term, as soon as I get my authorization, I would probably put in for clearance.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that that's a requirement as EUA. So they won't
Oh,
let
is
you
that right?
have an EUA unless you make a promise to make best efforts to
Yeah.
submit a 510K. So
So you can't just say, hey, look, I'm just here for the EUA period. I
you
have
have to at
no
least
intention of
pretend.
selling afterward.
You have to at least pretend that you have to demonstrate that you're doing something to try to get a 510K or PMA.
Huh, that's new news for me. Okay, I'll be quiet again. Well, actually, maybe I won't. Let's see what people are saying. So Stephen asks, so to clarify, that's fulfilling current orders, but not marketing or taking new orders post-emergency. I'm not sure that's a full question. Do you know what to do with that?
Well, I understand the question. It's that, like, well, what happens as soon as the emergency is canceled? And the regulation is very ambiguous about this. And I think that they will treat different products in different manners. So, for example, ventilators, they might allow those manufacturers a little bit more time to pull on the reins because it's a kind of like a bigger thing. For masks, they might be a little more brutal. I can't predict what they're going to do, and I haven't personally researched the previous pandemics or the SARS outbreak. I haven't researched specific use cases of that, but if anyone on the line has experience back in like 2004, for example, I think that would be really powerful to know about.
I just made Mark Bodley's microphone live. He's in South Africa, and he writes, ventilators are a huge focus at the moment where he is. Mark, do you have anything to ask directly or follow up on that?
Thank you, Joe, and also Shannon for your informative presentation this afternoon, or for you in the morning. Yes, the
Hey, everybody,
ventilator.
listen to his accent.
I love his accent.
The ventilator. Thank you. The ventilator situation here is quite chronic, and companies are rallying together like never before, right around the country, and are working on various working groups to facilitate the design, development, and sometimes, in some instances, reverse engineering of existing ventilators from non-invasive to invasive, so that we are ready for the early through to mature phase of COVID-19, and to make sure that we have sufficient for, we're expecting quite a few thousand ventilators to be needed in the next month to 3 months, and so that we don't get caught short. And the biggest challenge is to meet regulatory requirements as well. We haven't really been going for EUA approach. We're actually trying to meet our local regulatory SAHPRA, South African Health Product Regulatory Authority requirements from the word go, and at the same time having to have a license from SAHPRA. So there are a lot of new companies who've never made medical device before. You mentioned earlier Tesla and so on. Well, we've got automotive companies like VW, and we've got aerospace companies, and the CSR, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, whom I work really closely with as well as an independent medical devices, let's say, consultant and auditor. And we're banding together to meet this challenge. And it goes right from your ambubag, CPAP, BiPAP, right the way through to invasive ventilators. It's a big deal at the moment in South Africa.
Thank you, Mark.
I think also everywhere, and there's a lot of new players coming in. So when you do submit for your EUA, the FDA is going to look at a couple different things. I'll have a slide about this, but I'll try to just remember it. So they want to make sure that the team is experienced and polished and presents well. And at least appears to know what they're talking about when it comes to medical product development. So that's definitely a focus area for those kind of non-medical products that they go for FDA, EUA. You want to kind of present that the team knows what they're talking about. You want to talk about the amount of volume that you can produce and maybe some aspects of cost. So if you can provide a high volume, low cost opportunity, they will take that into consideration as to whether they grant you the emergency use authorization.
While we're on ventilators, Don Lin, I just made his mic live. He's applying for FDA approval through EUA for his ventilators. Don, are you in the US or OUS?
US.
You're in the US?
Yeah. But the product, the company is in China, and we got the CE marks already, and in 2018. But we got one round of questions, and also we answered already to the FDA.
I would think, Shannon, that someone with the CE mark should have a pretty easy time getting through EUA.
Absolutely, yeah. So the other thing that the FDA is looking for is that it's in an advanced stage of development. So if you're CE marked, that means that you're in a very advanced stage because you're up against these other ventilator companies that haven't received any regulatory approval anywhere. So the FDA is going to have a lower level of confidence for those products that they're going to work out. So they're going to move those advanced stage products to the front of the line. Right now, the FDA inbox is being bombarded, and they have to quickly prioritize which of these submissions do we want to look at. So if you're talking about a low volume, you know, not high fidelity, not advanced stage development phase, and maybe a team that's weak in medical devices, you're going to be pushed to the bottom of the list, and the FDA won't grant that authorization as soon, if at all.
Well, Don says that's great to know. But I'm wondering how many categories fall under EUA at this point? We're talking a lot about PPE. We're talking a lot about ventilators, and that's the end of Joe's knowledge. I mean, and then the pharmacological thing. Is it just basically 3 categories, or are there lots of other things that they're being bombarded with?
I think there's a lot of other things. People are trying kind of creative things.
Knows what they are. You're welcome to write a note and list them for us. But go ahead.
So for example, there's other products that you might not think of as commonly that can be submitted because they can help with the pandemic. Again, the government's goal as part of all of this is to stockpile medical products. So even if you have a medical product that is just used when you have patients in a hospital and you just need a higher quantity of that product, then you can get emergency use authorization.
But here on my screen, in an American hospital, don't you? Oh, but it's not indicated for use. So the EUA is broadening your indication for use?
Yeah, there's two things that it can do: broadening the indication for use, or just approving a product or authorizing a product that hasn't been authorized previously. So really you can think of any sort of product. If it's used to treat COVID-19 patients, then you can get an EUA for that.
So Alan Cooper offers cannulas and other breathing assist devices, and Beth Loring says low-cost wearable patient vital monitoring sign monitors. And there have been I've seen a lot of conversations about fast adapting CPAP and other breathing apparatus. So, okay, on with the show. Let's see.
So any sort of breathing assist would be really great, as well as patient monitoring, as Beth Loring pointed out. So I think there's many other examples, and it's worth a try to submit an authorization. For example, if you're a medical device developer or you have a really early stage startup and you've been working on a product, why not try for it?
Yeah.
That's sort of my attitude.
John Tuckwell writes, I'm working with a company out of the Bay Area called CareCube for a disposable isolation unit for rapidly evolving infectious diseases. And I'll also add that Ryan Kaufman's on the line, and he's with Battelle. And somebody earlier, yeah, Sherry Hendricks asked, Where is the document on approved ways of reusing, disinfecting and reusing N95s? We'll get back to that, Sherry, but
Go to
as a unit that you can
95dcon.com.
locally install and sterilize a great deal at once. You were going to say something?
I think Battelle is the company that got an emergency use authorization to clean masks, and so they have a validated process for doing so. There's a lot of FDA guidance and regulations surrounding reuse of masks. And so 95dcon is a nonprofit that's trying to basically do the same thing as Battelle, but they want to empower the hospitals to do it. And there's kind of some regulatory ambiguity there as to, is this eligible for EUA? We kind of concluded it sort of isn't, because they're not trying to sell the masks per se, and it's an entity that's a nonprofit. That's
Ryan, I just made your microphone live if you want to add anything.
No, I think what you guys are saying is correct. No changes.
Okay, and I see Roy, you're on the line too. I made your mic live. Anything to add? Mr. Morgan? All right. For you Schoolhouse Rock fans, Mr. Morgan is the subject of my sentence, and what the predicate says he does. That had no value in this call, but sometimes we need a little entertainment, even if it's self-entertainment. I've been in this house for a month, Shannon. I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Get out for a walk, man.
People ask us, how are we doing? I say, asymptomatic and at one another's throats. Which is, I suppose, pretty good. We're not sick. All right, sorry. All right, I'll go on mute. Go tell us important things.
Okay, so here's the current FDA focus from what I've been seeing, and it's more quantity over, as we just mentioned, there's so many other things that you can submit for EUA, but these are the topics that just keep coming up over and over again. We talked about ventilators, PPE, therapeutics, but another topic is in vitro diagnostics. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. I want more testing. So I submitted for a grant with the government to try to do actual use testing with diagnostic kits. And I'm really hopeful that we can get this grant to basically do the testing necessary to find out whether these diagnostic tests are efficacious or not. Because right now the FDA is using enforcement discretion. So there's all these manufacturers producing kits and then selling them, but they don't have emergency use authorization at all. And basically the kits are labeled as, hey, don't trust the results, be sure to get some other results. And as long as you put that label on there, you can sell your kit, which is interesting. So this is our opportunity for audience participation. So this case, we have this ventilator. It is not FDA approved. They were in the process of pursuing a 510K over the past 2 years. The device design is complete and V&V has not been conducted. They don't have any inventory, but they have started sourcing parts and suppliers are sort of ready. So is this product eligible for an emergency use authorization submission? Are we ready to submit our emergency use authorization? Are the votes coming in?
Sorry, I didn't realize that that was a question and answer part. But I've got 3 answers for yes.
Correct, that is correct. You can submit your emergency use authorization for this product.
Congratulations to Jeffrey Carlisle, John Tugwell, and Jim Lemon.
Woohoo! So then this drug was indicated for use to treat a rare form of arthritis. And it's been approved under Section 505, and it's been on the market for 5 years. There's been some reports of doctors using it off label, and it appears to maybe be effective, and minimal preliminary data looks promising for COVID-19 treatment. It is readily available. So is it eligible for an emergency use authorization?
Joe votes yes. Jessica, Jeffrey, and Stephen and Jim vote yes. And Beth votes yes. And Bill votes no. I made up Bill. I made him up. I just thought it was too easy for everyone to say yes now. But yes.
Well, I'm glad that people are understanding and kind of It seems like I've communicated how it works then, so that's a good check-in. So I'm going to just run through a couple more slides here. So I'm not going to read this, but this is the Emergency Use Authorization Declaration. So on February 4, that's when this all started. And as of February 5, you're allowed to submit for an emergency use authorization. So as soon as they declare EUA, you can go ahead and do it. This has happened with other serious life-threatening disease conditions. And then these are the criteria for issuance. So it has to be threatening, as we all know COVID-19 is. There has to be evidence of effectiveness, but the key bolded term here is may. So the FDA will consider your product if it may be effective. So as we saw with that example just now, there were instances of off-label use that maybe seemed promising, and that was sort of the basis for chloroquine getting approved or authorized through EUA. The standards for authorizing a product definitely has a lower level requirement than sort of what the FDA typically requires. And you kind of cover this aspect by offering a strong risk-benefit analysis. So at UserWise, we do a lot of risk-benefit analyses for human factors. So it's sort of like an obvious thing to help with during this time. So when you're doing a risk-benefit analysis, you want to take all of your in vitro data, any sort of clinical trial data that you might have, or you might not have any clinical trial data, and also any in vivo efficacy data. And then you want to discuss the known and potential benefits and weigh those against the known and potential risks. And then finally, there need to be no alternatives. So there need to be no adequate, approved, or available alternatives. As we started the call with, there's about 1,000 different mask companies throwing their hats in the ring. So you might ask, well, seems like things are going to be available, but I want to circle back to government stockpiling. So the government does not view the supplies of masks to be adequate, and they would probably conclude that they're unavailable, and I guess inadequate is more of related to contraindications for special circumstances or populations. So I think with this pandemic, it's going to be pretty easy to argue there's no alternatives, even though, you know, at a first glance you might say, there seem to be alternatives, but they want to make sure that there's plenty on the market. Any questions so far?
I want to show off how smart I am. My friend Eddie asks, can you use any data from usage under EUA towards a 510K or PMA? Joe says yes, and you should.
Yes, absolutely. And I would strongly urge, if you're a ventilator company, if you submitted, and I'm going to show another slide here. This slide. So this is the list of, this is straight from the FDA guidance, and it basically says, here are all the things you want to mention in your submission for emergency use authorization. So you need to submit, you sort of have a very small collection of aspects to include in your emergency use authorization. As you can see, adverse event monitoring and reporting is required, but basically V&V. So when you look at CGMP and data collection and analysis, those are discretionary. So the FDA may or may not require you to do that. I'm a specialist in human factors. I've been seeing the FDA hasn't been heavily enforcing human factors for many of these products. So they're definitely allowing a subset of aspects to be submitted, but I want to just highlight that adverse event monitoring reporting is required. And this is an area, post-market surveillance is an area that I'm really passionate about, because I believe it can be used to really truly assess safety of a product. When you're submitting even for a 510K, you're giving the FDA a snapshot of how your product works, what sort of testing you did. But the real deal is when you actually sell it to customers. When you actually sell it to customers, that's when the real safety data is really happening. And if we could do a better job of collecting adverse events and product issues in the field and kind of streamline that back into the company, we can do a great job of making sure that we're keeping that product safe. And this is a really important aspect of EUAs. since we're breezing through a lot of these traditional steps of medical product development, we really have to amp up our adverse event monitoring and reporting. So making sure that you have a system in place, making sure that you have a call center that's well trained. Your call center or whoever's on the other line, they need to both know how to help your, for example, ventilator respiratory therapists to navigate issues that they're experiencing right then and there. And they also need to be trained on how to collect data and then feed this back both into the legal reporting requirements of MDR to the FDA, but also feeding it back into that design and making sure that you're getting in front of that. And if you can set up this framework, and this is sort of a long circle back coming to the original question, which is you can use that data for your 510K. And this has precedent. So UserWise frequently will assist companies in obtaining 510Ks. And one of our biggest data sources for some types of products is adverse events and on-market data for both the predicate products and any sort of previous products developed by our client. Basically, this is a very long way of saying if you do a great job at post-market surveillance, you're really going to set yourself up for success in your 510K. You may even be able to circumvent an entire IDE. I mean, no promises, but there's things that can be done because the reality is that your product is being used on actual people, and using the product on actual people is the biggest clinical study of all and the biggest usability study of all.
Shannon, do you know how to freeze your screen so that no matter what you do, this is all we see? Do you know how to do that? Just pause your screen. The reason I ask is because I'd love it if you emailed me your deck during the call so I can manipulate it and throw it up on my website and give people a link, because a lot of folks want it and I'd love to accommodate them before they leave this call. In the meanwhile,
I'm not sure I know how to do that.
Well, if you're relatively confident there's nothing super secret that you mind the world seeing, then let us see you email it to me, but that's up to you. In the meanwhile, Charles asks, who reviews the EUA proposal? Is it only FDA? Where does HHS play into this? I believe they don't, but you're the expert. It's FDA who approves, who authorizes emergency use and no other government body.
Correct. So I believe HHS is where the regulation comes from, but the FDA is the entity empowered by this by this declaration. They're empowered to make these decisions and issues the EUAs. Okay.
I have a question. You were talking about validation and market validation, post-market work.
Surveillance.
Thank you. Can you get an EUA without any quality management system in place?
As far as I understand, there have been companies that have been able to, well, I guess I shouldn't, with absolutely no quality management system and a statement that we will not put a QMS in place.
No one's going to say I'm not gonna.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that the FDA isn't looking under the rug there. And if you remain silent on it, they might not notice that you don't have that.
If anyone knows otherwise, please say so in the comments. Michael Sturdivant wants us to know that Steris has also been approved for sterilized N95 masks. Erica wants to know, what are the IRB requirements for using an EUA product? Because it has the designation, is it akin to approved and thus does not need IRB? And for those of us playing along at home who don't know what IRB stands for, it means?
In institutional or investigational review board. So at UserWise, we use IRB if we have a usability study that might present the potential for harm with the users in our study, or more commonly in a clinical study, you need ethical oversight for running that clinical study. So EUA means that you are authorized to sell and market your device in the basically in the free market. So there's no sort of clinical oversight. And the adverse event reporting is the only sort of quote unquote clinical oversight that exists. So there's no IRB requirement because it isn't a clinical study.
Catherine, who I suspect has to leave, compliments you and says she would love to hear the rest of your talk, which has been excellent so far. So I just shared with her and the rest of the world the link to the channel where I'll be uploading this. Mark, our friend in South Africa, has 2 follow-up questions. How would we in South Africa
Can you speak with an accent though?
Pardon me?
Can you speak with an accent though?
Let him do it. Okay, Bodley, entertain us with your silly accent.
Would you like me to ask the question for you?
Yes.
Joe and Shannon? Yeah,
Yes,
in South
please.
Africa, the applicability of the EUA for our devices here, including test kits, which are also really very, very much sought after at the moment, both PCR as well as the serological antibody type. How would we apply for EUA for new devices in South Africa, and would it actually be applicable here?
So EUA only applies to the US. It's a US mechanism for selling within the US. But if you do get it, it could give you a lot more clout in your home country because it's like, oh, the US FDA has authorized our product. So it could be a good marketing ploy.
Which reminds me,
Indeed.
we've been talking EUA and US, but the whole world is affected. Are there EUA equivalents in many systems? Does TGA have one? Does CDA have one? Does European Union have one? How does it work?
I mean, at a high level, about a month ago, I was really passionate about getting serological COVID-19 test kits here into the United States. But due to the EUA enforcement, we were kind of not allowing these products to be shipped in, and we became the laughing stock of the world because the FDA and the United States had the highest level bar or highest requirements in the whole world about serological COVID-19 tests. And so we were basically preventing tests from coming into our country. Everyone was laughing at us. So that sort of lays the kind of framework here. The FDA tends to have higher requirements than other entities for many products. Typically, what I've been seeing is that in other countries, it's a little bit easier to sell your product. You might just, sign a form and say, I'm going to sell this product, or even do nothing, and they'll just use enforcement discretion. But I'm not familiar with South Africa specifically.
Shannon, we don't actually have an EUA per se, but our regulatory authority here is taking serious note of EUA status of kits that we are starting to bring in as of this last week. So it has got credibility, and we do value both FDA approval and a linked EUA as well as CE mark very highly. So it has got credibility here. Okay, but we'd have to get our devices done in the US. From what I understand, if we would like an EUA approval, we would have to submit it in the USA. But maybe we'll be calling on you for some guidance on that one.
I'm happy to help.
Look at that, business is being done. Charlene wants to compliment Mark on his amazing accent. Don lets us know that China has an equivalent of EUA. And Stephen Geary says the European Union would probably be conditional authorization, at least for medicines. Mr. Bodley of great accent also was asking, is the sterilization method of Steris for N95 masks gamma or ETO? So does the person who let us know, it was Mark, I think, who let us know. Oh, Mr. Sturdivant knew that Steris was approved for N95 masks. Is it gamma or ETO, if you know? Or if Jeff Sauter knows, or if Roy or Ryan know, that would be appreciated. Off you go, Mr. Bodley. Joe and Shannon writes Chanaz Kanawati. I'm going to go Indian, I don't know. Thank you so much for interesting webinars. Would you share your company's LinkedIn details so they can become your follower? Yes.
Are you able
We'll
to
do
see my screen still?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you able to see my screen still?
Yes, EU conditions required versus
This
discretionary.
is the letter to Steris. I'm happy to send it, but this is their authorization. So
I think you may have frozen your screen because right now I'm on slide 57. There we go. April
so
9,
this is Steris letter authorizing them to proceed with their Steris products, their low temperature sterilization systems. I'm happy to send this. This is in the public domain.
Best would be email it to me and let's see. Yeah, I think if you email it to me, I don't know if I can send it attachments here, but I can
Sure,
at least
yeah.
share it when I follow up with folks. Jeff Sauter wrote, Steris is VA. I don't know what that stands for. Hydrogen, oh, vaporized hydrogen peroxide, Ed Lynn tells me. Steris and Battelle are both. And Jessica, you gave me a download link. What is that exactly? Before I throw it out to everybody. Franklin asks, it should take you to the Steris letter. Okay, thank you. Pardon me. I'll share that. And by the way, the cough into my hand, which is not advised, I haven't left the house, so I should be okay. I'm going to touch my face, but I don't advise you to do it. I'm sending the Steris link to everybody, courtesy of Jessica Phillips. Franklin writes, a number of university, engineering, and medical groups are developing ventilators and systems for reprocessing N95 masks. What's the likelihood these will receive EUA?
So I've been assisting a PhD student who's involved with 95 decon, and I think it's TBD whether EUA is applicable to that specific effort, but I can't speak to other efforts. But basically, the FDA is regulating manufacturers and they're regulating the sale of medical products. But when you talk about a hospital reprocessing products for their own employees, it's more of an OSHA issue, and I'm not sure whether it falls under the FDA's jurisdiction at all. But I'm definitely not certain about that.
Michelle, I just made your mic live. Do you A, know the answer to that? Or if not, go ahead and ask your question.
I don't think that there is any really good clean-cut answer to Shannon's point, because there are so many entities who are regulating all of this in different spaces right now, and the guidance has not been tremendously consistent amongst them. But so my question, Shannon, was separately, because I'm noticing that the general EUA letters came out, and the wording wasn't overly consistent with what the expectation for the reporting procedures were for the adverse events. And my question is I remember when I was back in industry, I had to set up the ESG reporting portal. That's a freaking train wreck of a technical challenge, let's just say that. And you have to have normal information to put, like a registration, a listing, like all of these traditional FDA reporting terminology. What do you think? Does the FDA really expecting every company who is setting up underneath these temporary emergency orders to register with that ESG portal and go through all of those hoops? Or do you think they'll accept the old-fashioned paper form for the 3500 reporting?
Well, another important part of EUA is that the FDA is very collaborative, and they're so receptive to companies' needs, and they'll just sort of bend to the will of the the companies at the moment. So I think that if you started that dialogue, I don't have personal experience finding out the answer to that question, but I think that if you were to just ask the question and present the difficulty associated with, signing up for that portal, I think that they'd be willing to work with you. And it also might be a situation where you want to collect a bunch of data, and you could, mail in the adverse events within 7 days, and kind of do that process, and then in some ways ask for forgiveness. But I do think an upfront conversation would be helpful. But I know as much as you do, so.
I think you two would make fast friends, and let's make sure that Denise gets you on that chat room because Michelle's there. Charlene wants to know, can you name a company making the kits with disclaimers?
Oh, a specific company? I could make a list. I've been talking to a bunch of them, and none of them are like known names that I would remember, but there's just a ton that are, there's been weekly calls with the FDA. They're really awesome. If you're involved in COVID-19 diagnostic test kits, especially serological test kits, definitely call into the weekly FDA calls about it, where the FDA just talks about their enforcement discretion. They have a guidance about it, and there's this Appendix D where it basically says what I said. It says, if you put this labeling on your product, you don't have to do an EUA. And a lot of those companies are calling into those calls, but I've also been sort of emailing with a couple of them. I'm trying to persuade one of them to let me do a clinical study for them. And I have not been successful yet, because they're sort of like getting away with making money by just selling it and not having an EUA. So that they're not really incentivized to find out whether their test kits work or not.
Corey Jastov wants to know, if we make a mask that doesn't require pre-market notification, do we need an EUA?
No, yeah, they're definitely using enforcement discretion. If you're not going to claim that your mask filters particles, for example, and it's just a mask, there's no requirement. It's the same as selling a bandana. It's just, can you convince hospitals and people in the public to buy it? But there's different levels of masks. Mm-hmm.
Victoria just wants us to know that Ford posted on LinkedIn this morning a press release about making ventilators. And Mr. Montague wants to tell everyone, is everyone aware that Patel Labs of Columbus, Ohio, has received FDA approval for a peroxide sterilizer, which can sterilize 40,000 N95 masks per batch, and they can be re-sterilized, these masks, up to 20 times. So if that is news for someone, I hope that they can leverage that at a local facility. Corey offers EPA may be mask. Ryan actually clarifies, pardon me, that it's twice as many. It's 80,000 masks a batch, up to 20 times. Does UserWise have the bandwidth to take on additional projects? Mark wants to know. Can we hand you business and money?
All right,
would you be willing to accept that?
Yeah, I'm happy to help. We're a staff of 10 engineers, and we've been working around the clock to fight this pandemic, so we definitely want to help wherever we're needed, nonprofit or for-profit.
Clarifies that it's 80,000 masks a day, not a batch.
Yeah, this is a Batel's authorization letter, so I was just perusing it to see the number, but I can send this one to you.
Where's my friend who has the link to that? I'll take it if you have it, and I'll share that with the group. Sherry wants to know, is the document on approved ways of reusing? Oh, where is the document on approved ways of reusing N95s?
So there's guidance. I don't know if you can hear this, but there's like, they're cutting down a tree or something behind me.
So far,
okay.
we're good. And if you can't hear my children upstairs singing, then we're equally good.
I actually couldn't hear what you just said. I'm sorry, but
is there a document on how to reuse N95s?
So I will send the guidance document around reprocessing of masks. And I do believe 95 Decon will be coming out with a statement soon. So that's driven by Robert Gustafson, PhD at Harvard. He's awesome and has kind of cleared up some requirements for hospital reuse of masks. But yeah, I think, and you're welcome to reach out to me offline and I can answer any specific questions, because it all depends on kind of who you are and how you're reprocessing the masks, what sort of regulations might apply to you.
We're at an hour. I'm fine going over, not everybody is. So we can talk a bit more. There are a few more comments. Before folks go, you're welcome to type your praise for Shannon Clark and her contributions today. But I'd like to ask, we don't have a speaker and a topic identified for next week. So if there are topics of particular interest for you as it relates to COVID-19, this would be a great time to tell me. If you want to nominate yourself or someone else to talk about it, that would also be great. The praise is pouring in, and congratulations on your marriage. There are a few people who want to know something about the dance you mentioned.
Yeah, so the tradition is that you have 3 dances. You have 30 seconds per team. So you flip a coin, and then the boys have to come up. They have 2 minutes to come up with a dance, and then they have 30 seconds to dance to the song of their choice. And then it goes back and forth, boys, girls, and then the crowd decides who wins.
Fair enough. Here's a serious question. Charles wants to know, thank you for the time of the talk, very informative. Is there a link to FDA's weekly call on serology? You mentioned it. If you have that link, I can include it in.
Send it.
Okay,
Yes.
send these things to me. I'm going to try to get an email out to everyone today with the links and such. Stephen Geary asks, this may be beyond the scope of the webinar. What are the liability implications beyond normal medical device production? Does this have a higher risk profile for a manufacturer, or is there some sort of federal waiver?
Yeah, so I've been meeting with lawyers about this because I am curious about this. Typically when we develop ventilators, we do human factors validation testing with 15 users of each user profile. So it's very strenuous testing. We're really trying to uncover all the human error associated with it. And that's just one example of validation testing. And basically very little of this validation is occurring with ventilators from what I can tell. It's much scaled down. So then what sort of liability is a given ventilator company accepting when they're taking this approach? Because the FDA isn't requiring them to do it. And basically the FDA is saying, if you tell us that you did B and V, we're okay. We don't really need to, look under the rug. So usually my role as a human factors engineer, the existence of that, a lot of that is driven through regulatory requirements. So now I'm seeing my clients might not be doing as much human factors as they normally would, or other, risk management activities. So certainly you're adopting a ton of liability and risk. And I've been trying to put together a webinar about that with some lawyers to try to just really clarify, like, why would anyone make a ventilator right now if you're just going to sit in court for 2 years after this emergency ends? Because inevitably, if you make a ventilator with reduced testing, there will be issues that occur in the field. One lawyer did tell me that as long as you label, you identify what are all the flaws and you label it to kind of notify users. Another thing you could do is say, this is for emergency use during the pandemic. It has not had this and that and this testing. It may have this and that and this flaws. That could theoretically cover you from a liability standpoint, but if someone wants to sue you, they're definitely going to sue you. And one other anecdote, I was speaking with a founder of a company going for an EUA for a product, and he was basically telling me, like, I'm not taking any joy out of any of this. Sure, there's a bunch of revenue that might be coming in from this, but I know I'm going to be sitting in a court of law for 2 years after this all ends, no matter what I do. So I'm doing it for the public good, but I'm taking no, financial benefit from what we're doing here, and it's all just because I feel the moral obligation to do it.
Somebody asked me yesterday if I he had an idea for ventilation, and he asked me if I had access to any funding or if I knew anyone. And I said, from a strictly investment standpoint, as an N of one, this is not the risk reward profile I would seek. Here, let me help you make a ventilator. Start now, help us with COVID-19, and I'm going to get rich. I don't think so.
Yeah, not enticing from a business or legal standpoint in any way.
The only person I could think of would be a philanthropist with a grant.
And what I'm seeing also is a ton of government funding. So also the government, FEMA, the Department of Defense, when they're making large purchases of medical products, they are, in some cases, paying up front with the understanding that these medical products haven't been manufactured yet to try to fund these companies. So it's sort of like a really unique and new model for funding. Like you just go ahead and sell it and then use that money to make it. There's also the BAA BARDA grant. That's the grant that I applied to for doing the clinical study. So there's a lot of government funding available too.
Beth Loring wants you to know that you have rocked as always.
Thank you, Beth.
And Aaron, Jeremy, and Eddie gave me suggestions for next week. I'll read them aloud, and if folks on the call have a special one that they want. Aaron says, what's the next phase of this pandemic? Such as vaccines becoming available, people returning to work, and what are the challenges anticipated in that phase where medical device manufacturers can help? And will the EUA still apply in those later stages? So Aaron Peterson is asking, what's next once the vaccine is available and people start returning to work, and how medical device manufacturers can help? So say, yay, Aaron, if that's a topic of interest for you. Jeremy asks, novel solutions to serology testing. If you decide on this topic, Trifecta Companies would like to be one of the featured solutions with its dried blood collection device for at-home testing. Noted. Eddie asks, development of serology testing. Okay, that's 2 votes. He doesn't have any expertise in this, but as Shannon mentioned, this is going to be a key issue going forward. Fauci said a test may be available soon, but if anyone has insights on this, he'd be interested. Important issue is false negative, false positive statistics. Stephen offers, if you're across the pond in EU, the Commission has assorted Horizon 2020/EIC funding. I don't know what EIC stands for, do you? Okay. National level governments then have innovation grants, including Ireland and UK. Also Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Yes, answer. We have similar funding organization, the Solidarity Fund. European Innovation Council's the answer. Jeffrey votes for serology testing. Victoria asks, what about in between returning to work and before the vaccine is available? All fair points. We're at about $1:15 now, so I'm going to once again invite everyone on the call to join the chat room so I can give you stuff throughout the week. And I also will upload this video to this channel, and it's my goal to get out an email to everyone who registered today with all the stuff that Shannon said she was going to provide, because she's going to email me immediately after this call.
We have the
Shannon
slide.
Clark, ladies and gentlemen,
The
with
slide.
a special shout out to the arborist outside.
What was that?
You say shout out to the special arborist outside.
I know. Check out what he's trying to do.
Shannon, this was great. This is my first time meeting you. A pleasure.
Yeah, so nice to meet you. Thanks for
Not
the
only was this fun and educational, but honestly, folks, the folks who are on the call, I recognize so many of your names, and it warms me that you come back and you see value in these. And I hope this is more than feel good, but that we're actually doing some good. And maybe through these conversations, we save a life or two. Wouldn't that be neat? So until next week, or until later today, because you're on the chat room, this is Joe Hage signing off for Shannon Clark and UserWise. Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.